Hey guys, this is that Pete from Five Nerds Go, just wanting to do a brief follow-up on the gaming podcast from last night. Don't worry, I'm not going to be fighting my corner on the Sonic and Mario battle. In my opinion, Sonic is the best nostalgically, Mario is the best in terms of longevity. That's my line, and that's what I've drawn. So, I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk today about my love for role-playing games. Now, first of all, what is a role-playing game? Because a lot of people think that role-playing games are strictly your turn-based sort of Final Fantasy type games. But as you know, that genre has evolved over time. Now, I'm not going to use my own description of what an RPG is. I'm going to use Wikipedia's because I don't want people flaming me saying, "Well, no, because this means this and this means that." So here's what I think. Based on Wikipedia, a role-playing game is. So, a role-playing video game is a video game genre where the player controls the actions of a character immersed in some well-defined world. Now, for me, that means that games like Zelda, Golden Axe Warrior, Alundra, fit into the same category as games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and it's hard. It's hard to sort of disagree with people that say, well, no, Zelda's an adventure game. Yes, it is an adventure game, but you do play a character in a well-defined world, and you kind of have a lot of freedom in what you can do. So for me, any game that's under that umbrella, for me, is a role-playing game. Now, role-playing games didn't really come to the forefront of video game consoles until probably around, I think it was 1982 that Dragon Stomp came out for the Atari 2600. It was one of the only games that made use of it was a cassette loading device for the Atari 2600 before Commodore 64 actually decided to start using theirs, and it was huge for its time. I mean, the added space of the cassette just gave it that little bit of longevity that games missed back then. I can't really tell you that much about it. I have briefly played it on the Atari emulators, and I didn't enjoy it that much, but I can understand how it got people hooked back then. There were a lot of games in that sort of era that came out that were all style and no substance, because you've had to release a game that had a lot of time to it, and therefore less room for graphics, less room for enemies on screen, etc. Or you had to, cheat the player and say, right, okay, this is how the game's going to be longer. You're going to lose like 3 lives every level and face about 1 million game over screens before you complete this game. And so for me, the RPG was a breath of fresh air. And I think the first game that really came out that was like, wow, this is a miracle in a cartridge, was the Dragon Quest for the NES, which was called Dragon Warrior in North America, up until Dragon Quest 8, The Journey of the Cursed King, which is a fantastic game if you ever get to play it. It's on the PlayStation 2. I've just downloaded it for my laptop to play it on the emulator because I had it. It's now worth about 30-40 quid. Don't really want to spend that much money on a PlayStation 2 game. I've already given the money to the publishers when I bought it in the first place, so I don't see an issue as such. But it's a fantastic game, and it derived from the original Dragon Quest on the NES, which was absolutely huge for its time. It was an 8-bit cartridge, and aside from the fact that you had to grind for levels, which was probably another way of adding length to a game, it was also a very, very long game for its time. I enjoyed it. I've played it. I wouldn't rate it above many in the history of RPGs that I've played. However, it is a very good game in its own right. Um, moving on to 1987 was the next big boom in terms of RPGs, because you had Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, which was a game I've never ever got into, simply because it doesn't look like a game that I'd enjoy. In terms of the combat, it's an action game, but in terms of the actual gameplay, it's got RPG mechanics, and you shouldn't really go to different areas until you've leveled up a bit and things like that. So it is an RPG in that sense. It's open world. You can go anywhere you want if you want, but there's things that you can't access until you've got certain items or you've got to a certain level. So that was the first big one, but they also released Phantasy Star for the Sega Master System around the same time. And all I can say on that is what a game. Phantasy Star 1 was an RPG that basically got me into RPGs. It was hard as hell. You could die in the first 10 minutes of the game if you weren't careful, just on random encounters to level up to buy better equipment. Basically, it was a top-down game, except when you were in dungeons, when it took more of an isometric view. But during the open world part, it was top-down, and you would grind by moving backwards and forwards and getting random encounters, much like most RPGs nowadays. In the first area, the programmers coded in quite a few separate enemies, and one of them that was extremely difficult was the owl bear, which actually just looked like an eye with a pair of wings. But until you got the items from the shop that you needed to raise money for, you could not beat them. They were just impossible. They would just take you out within 3 rounds of combat, and you'd be starting again. And it put a lot of players off, and it put me off at first, to be honest, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was happy to just go from town to town, just seeing what happened. And it was only after a few years of owning the cartridge that I actually thought, you know what, I'm going to give this a proper go. And I got into it, and I got some grid paper for the dungeons, and I was mapping out dungeons, and I spent so much time on that game. Now, the thing with Phantasy Star is it suffered from what I like to call Sega-itis. Because you see, Sega didn't know how to capitalise on something that was successful. The only thing they really managed to capitalise on was Sonic, and even now they failed in the long term with regards to Sonic. But what happened with Phantasy Star is that in the same year, Final Fantasy 1 came out, and Final Fantasy 1 was for the NES. It was, in my opinion, an inferior game to Phantasy Star, but because because more people had Nintendo, because more people were sort of interested in that console, that game got the more coverage. And if you go out into the streets and say, name an RPG that inspired you, you know, people are going to be talking Final Fantasy 7, they're going to be talking Final Fantasy 1, they might even talk about Dragon Quest, but you will very rarely find somebody that talks about Phantasy Star 1. Now, Final Fantasy was a very, very good game for its time. You had four characters. You could pick what they were, and it gave you a lot of freedom in terms of your way through the game. There were some parties that wouldn't make it impossible to complete, but it would make it very, very tedious. but it was a very accessible, fun game. You had to do a lot of talking to find out where you had to go, and that was a good thing at the time. Anyway, moving on. More Dragon Warriors came out, more Final Fantasy came out, and there wasn't really anything major until Phantasy Star 2 for the Genesis. Because what Phantasy Star 2 did for the Genesis was it gave you a character-driven storyline. Every character had a personality. One of your party died at some point, and although it wasn't done in a way like Aerith's death for Final Fantasy VII, it was still done in a way that made it tugged at your heartstrings a little bit. So for me, Phantasy Star 2, it was good because it sort of introduced character-driven story. It introduced serious themes and subject matter, and to be honest, the battle system had some good strategy things to it. It was a game that I got for the Genesis just before I got a Sega CD, and it's sad because I never actually completed Phantasy Star 2. Because when I got the Sega CD, I was like really excited, and I had games like Road Avenger. I had games like Power Rangers, the full motion video game. Star Wars Rebel Assault, I believe it was called. These games were poor, but you'd never seen anything like that before, and so it was different, and so you wanted to play them. I got Prince of Persia for the first time for the Sega CD, and I was just engrossed. Not in the gameplay, but the cutscenes for it were just wow. So yeah, after that, I didn't really play many RPGs for a long time. Once I grew out of them, I'd just say that video games changed, and I didn't know my identity as a video game player for a long time. I got a PlayStation 1, and I went straight. I was umming and ahhing about it, to be honest, and got an N64. I believe I got a Dreamcast as well. I think that was the next generation. So, for me, I think Final Fantasy VII, I didn't play it on release. I played it maybe a couple of years later. And it was the greatest video game that I had ever played in my life at the time. There's other games that have surpassed that now, but for me, Final Fantasy VII was one of them games that I was like, wow, Sephiroth and Cloud and Aerith dying and Tifa and all these different characters, and it was just epic because you had the character-driven story, you had serious issues, you had people dying from your party, you had risk, and not only that, but they had side quests. They had 3 discs worth of content, full motion video, cutscenes, and it was just incredible. For its time, Final Fantasy VII was just incredible. And once I played Final Fantasy VII, once I completed Final Fantasy VII, it made me want to go back. It made me want to look at games like Chrono Trigger. It made me look at games like the other Final Fantasy games, which I'd not played. And I was a bit confused by the numbering, because we had Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, and then I believe they came out again. There's like 2 and 3 on the SNES, and there's one that we didn't actually get. So the only way that you could actually play these games was through emulators and things like that. And so that's what I did. And if there's one genre of video game that I will always enjoy, it's role-playing games. And that's because you can get so engrossed in them, get so what's the word? You can get so into the little details of the game, and you know, nothing compares to opening up a Final Fantasy game. And I'm talking Final Fantasy 8, I'm talking Final Fantasy 9, I'm even talking 10, maybe 12. Opening them up, putting them into your disc for the first time, and seeing that cutscene, that epic cutscene at the beginning. And somehow, I think the big companies that sort of grew fat on the land, as they say, have sort of gone a bit laxy-daisy in terms of the Final Fantasy games, in terms of the role-playing games. But that's not for me to say. You know, some people enjoy the new approach. I understand that there's got to be a modern way of doing things. There was a new Persona game recently that's done really, really well on sales, and people are enjoying it. And you know, maybe one day Squaresoft, other companies might look at it and go, well, actually, maybe we are going in the wrong direction. But for me, you know, as long as RPGs sort of have their differences, I think there'll always be an RPG that I will play. I'm loving the Tales series at the minute. I've played most of them. I don't think that they're amazing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't like the art style. I think it's a bit kiddie. I thought the same about Blue Dragon, which I think is a fantastic RPG, but I think it's just a bit too stupid. Dragon Quest 8, I had a fucking Yoda. I had Yoda following me around in my party, and you know, for me, I like my games, like my Final Fantasy 7, like 8, like 9, quirky but not too quirky. I like a bit of real crossed with fantasy. But you know, there's a lot of games I grew up with, a lot of games that I'd like to talk to you about in the future. I'm gonna leave it there, guys. Right, this is, like I say, it's the first time I've ever done anything like this. So if you're more interested in space potatoes or anything like that, then there's other podcasts and there's other shows throughout the week being recorded. Just like to thank you for listening. You can follow us at even on Twitter at the oh, lost it. Let's try again. You can follow us on Twitter at 5nerdsgo. You can also like us and share us on Facebook. We're on YouTube, and we are also on iTunes and Acast. That's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed listening. If you've not, then please just swat something in the comments anyway. Thank you. Goodbye.